This tape is primarily to introduce you to laws and processes that will in turn lead you precisely to living the perfect life that you're wanting. On this tape, you'll meet us, Jerry and Esther, and you'll learn how we've been led by our wanting to these processes and to these experiences. You will meet Abraham, who will explain the reason for this interaction and the value to you of understanding these laws and processes. From the time that I was a small child, I've been looking for answers, looking for what was true. I can't remember a time that I was not wanting to understand more so that I could be of more value. Looking back, I can see how that wanting led me step by step through a wide variety of books and life experiences to this present point of clarity that I'm enjoying so much. And so now, as I hear the wisdom of Abraham, I can recognize the truth of what they teach, because I have lived those truths again and again through this physical life experience. It excites me to know that you're having the opportunity to listen to this recording, because I know from my personal experience and from what others have told me of their personal experiences, the value of what Abraham speaks and how dramatically it has benefited all areas of our life experiences. I'm eager for you to hear the simple and practical laws and processes that they offer so that you may clearly and consciously attract everything that you're wanting into your experience and release anything that you now have that you're not wanting. In my earlier years, I studied and participated in one philosophy or religion after the other. Each one of them stated that they had found the answers to right and wrong. But then as I moved from one group to another, I became quite disappointed in my search as I heard each one of them tell me that the truths that all of the other groups had believed in and were teaching me were false. It was only after meeting Abraham that I've come to understand and no longer feel negative emotion about those apparent contradictions. About 1959, I found a Ouija board. I was visiting some friends in Spokane, Washington. And although I strongly disbelieved in its viability at first, once I had the opportunity to see for myself that something real was happening with it, I decided to ask some real questions. And so I asked through the board, how can I become truly good? And the board spelled read. I said, read what? It said books. I asked, what books? It spelled really fast, Any and All by Albert Schweitzer. Now my friends asked me, who's Albert Schweitzer? I said, I think he's a doctor in Africa. They said, has he written any books? I said, not that I know of, but I'll be in Lethbridge tomorrow, Alberta, Canada, and I'll check at the library and see if he has. It's not that I learned anything from reading Schweitzer's books that I could use in my life, except that it was kind of like what the Ouija board was. In other words, the very fact that the board worked made me realize that there were major phenomena regarding non-physical beings that I didn't know anything about. And then meeting Schweitzer through his books opened my mind further to the fact that I didn't know everything in that direction, philosophy and the Bible either. So I bought a Ouija board, and although it wouldn't work for me, I tried it on hundreds of people, in my travels as an entertainer, and I found about 3 people that it really did work for. One of those was a fellow entertainer in Portland, Oregon. We talked with non-physical beings that told us that in physical form they had been pirates and priests, there were politicians and rabbis. It was just the kind of conversations you might have at parties, and it was a very different attitude from the one on the Ouija board that suggested that I read Schweitzer. There was nothing of value that I could use in my life or that I could learn to teach to anybody else that they could use. So one day I just threw it off into the bushes. That was the end of that stage of my conscious non-physical interest or activity. The next major thrust forward occurred in 1965. While doing concerts in a series of colleges and universities, I found Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. And just as I'd had no interest or belief in the Ouija board before I personally experienced it, I had no conscious interest or belief in thinking and growing rich until I started reading that book. Yet for some reason I picked it up, and about 12 pages in, my hair was just standing up all over my body, thrill bumps everywhere. I decided to do exactly as it suggested, and it worked so well for me that in a very brief time I was able to build a multinational business, touching meaningfully the lives of many thousands. I even began teaching the principles that I was learning from the book. And then after Esther and I were married, that was in 1980, I told her about some of my Ouija board experiences. She finally said, Jerry, and we really get along. She said, I really don't want to hear about the Ouija board. I can't even stay in the room when you talk about it. So you see, she had been taught to have tremendous fear of it. So since I didn't want to disturb her, that was the end of me even talking about the Ouija board. By 1983, I'd kind of come as far as I wanted to with teaching Think and Grow Rich. I'd seen a few people become millionaires, a very few. I saw lots of people expand, but I also saw a number of people whose lives didn't seem to get much better no matter how many courses they took. And so I felt there has to be another level of knowing that I can find. So my search just continued. It was about that time, we were in a library in Phoenix, and I spotted a book on a shelf entitled Seth Speaks, S-E-T-H. And I thought, I wonder what that is. I took the book down, and as I started reading it, my hairs were standing on end again. Those massive thrill bumps were there again, and I thought, here we go again. Now, Esther didn't want to hear about that either. She said that she sensed that it was some sort of weird book. You see, Jane Roberts, the author, she and her husband, Robert Butts, she would go into a sort of a trance and allow Seth, a non-physical personality, to speak through her, and they wrote these Seth books. So rather than disturb Esther, I'd get up in the mornings while she was still asleep, and I would read. But then now I started telling Esther about the principles I was learning from the book, and she'd say, well, that's really good. You see, it was the process of a physical being in contact with non-physical beings that was frightening her. So I started using what I was learning in my life, and Esther started getting more excited and more interested. You see, her change in attitude came about as she became aware that through her personal experience, it all felt good. Whereas her fears before were not from her personal experience, but they were from what she had been led to believe by what others believed, from what they had been in turn led to believe, and so on. I've always believed in judging the tree by the fruits of it. And so everything that I look at how do I feel about it? And there was so much of it that just felt right for me. So it didn't make any difference where it came from or how it was presented. The fact that it was something that I found of value that I could use and that I could pass on to other people that I believed that they could use, I was excited. Esther had once asked me what I'd learned from those experiences with the Ouija board. And I told her I learned that there was an intelligence out there that was wanting and willing to communicate with us, and that some appeared to be as dumb as the dumbest of us, and some as bright or brighter than the brightest of us, and that although I didn't really understand it, I did accept the experience as valid because it had happened to me.
I really appreciate the time that we had reading those Seth books, because if it had not been for those books, I don't think that I would have had the transition that I did of being so afraid of this process to being so involved and so happily involved in it. In fact, as Jerry said, I was so excited after reading the books. I really wanted to go meet Seth. I wanted to meet this non-physical being that had all this wisdom. And I wanted to meet Jane and Rob too. But when we called Information, their number was non-published. And so we were trying to figure out what to do next. And we were having lunch in a restaurant in Scottsdale, Arizona. And a total stranger sitting behind us, who we were not conversing with, turned to us and said, "Have you read any of the Seth books?" Well, we couldn't believe it because we hadn't told a single person that we were reading those books. And he said, "Did you know that Jane Roberts is dead?" Well, we didn't know that. And it upset me so much because I felt like somebody had told me my sister was dead and I hadn't heard about it. It was shocking, and I was so disappointed because I was so excited about meeting Seth and about meeting them, and now I knew I couldn't. Within 1 or 2 days, our best friends and business associates there in Phoenix came to us and they said, "We have a tape we want you to hear." And they were acting weird, just like Jerry was acting over that book. And I said, "Well, what is it?" And they said, "Well, it's channeled." Well, I didn't know what channeled meant because in the Seth books that word was never used. And so I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And so as they began to explain a little bit, then I realized that it was the very process that we'd been experiencing through these Seth books. And they said, "There's a woman who is coming through Phoenix, and you can make an appointment." I think it was $100 for a half an hour.
Could ask any questions we wanted.
And so we made an appointment to sit and see this woman and meet her non-physical entity. And I can remember going over there, how excited we were. And we met in a beautiful home in Phoenix. And it was in the middle of the day. It was broad daylight. There was no spooky stuff or anything. All comfortable, all pleasant. And as we sat and visited with these non-physical beings, well, actually, I should say, as Jerry sat and visited with these non-physical beings, I don't think I said a word on the first meeting. I was absolutely amazed. Jerry had a notebook full of questions. He had questions he said he had saved up since he was 6 years old. He just fired those questions in, and then our time was up. The half hour passed so quickly. We felt so wonderful, and I said, can we go back tomorrow? Because now I had some questions, and I wanted to talk to these entities, and their name was Theo. And so when we went back the next day, I asked what we could do to move faster in our goals, and they said affirmations, and gave us a wonderful one. And we knew about affirmations. We were already using them. And then I said, what else? And they said, meditate. Well, when they said meditate, both of us kind of were taken back by it. I didn't know anybody personally who was meditating, but I thought of strangeness. It didn't seem like something that I could see myself doing.
I associated with people seeing how bad they could get their life, how much pain or how much poverty and still exist. It was like a challenge.
Walking on hot coals or laying on beds of nails or something that was weird like that. But then I said, well, what do you mean by meditate? And this entity said, sit in a quiet room and wear comfortable clothing and focus on your breathing. And as your mind wanders, and it will, just release the thought and focus back on your breathing. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound so difficult.
You would ask also if we could bring our daughter.
Oh, that's right. I asked if I should bring Tracy. She was 14 at the time. And they said, if it is the asking, but it is not necessary, for you too are channels. And I thought, how can we be something this strange or this important? I wasn't sure how I felt about it at that time, and not know it. So anyway, the tape recorder clicked off, and now I'm frustrated because I still had more questions and our time was up. And the lady who was operating the tape recorder, I think she sensed my frustration, and she said, well, do you have one last question? Like, do you want to know who your spiritual guide is or anything like that? Well, I would have never asked that question because I'd never heard of such a thing. I'd heard of guardian angel, but I hadn't heard of spiritual guide. But I said, yes, who is my spiritual guide? And then they said, we are told it will be given to you directly. You will have a clairvoyant experience, and you will know. And so our time was up, and we felt so good, and we went right home, and we put on our bathrobes, and we pulled the drapes in the living room, and we sat, and I had two intentions. I was going to meditate every day for 15 minutes, whatever that meant, and I was going to find out who my spiritual guide was. And they'd encouraged us to meditate together. They said it would be more powerful in our case because we were already compatible and in harmony. But we were embarrassed to do it together, and so we sat in these wing-back chairs with an etagere between us so we couldn't see each other. In order to not think of anything, which was what they'd encouraged us to do, or just to focus on our breathing, I began counting my breaths as the breaths went out and came in. And we had set a timer for 15 minutes. And within, I would say 3 or 4 minutes of this focusing on my breathing, I felt very numb. It was a wonderful sensation, tingly and numb. And the timer went off, and it really startled both of us. And I said, let's do it again. So we set the timer for 15 more minutes. And again, I felt that numbness. This time I couldn't feel the chair beneath me. It was as if I was suspended there in the room and nothing else was there. I was not even aware of Jerry. And the timer went off again, and again it startled us, and I said, let's do it again. And Jerry, I think he's thinking, oh brother, because I tend to be that way. I'm kind of all or nothing. And so we set the timer for 15 minutes again. And toward the end of that 15 minutes, again I was numb, but something breathed me. That was the way I would have described it right after it happened. It was as if something greater than me was breathing me, forcing the air in and out of my lungs. It was a wonderful, loving sensation.
It's like you were in a state of ecstasy.
It was really exciting and really wonderful and yet frightening because we didn't know really what had happened. My teeth buzzed. They didn't chatter, they buzzed.